This podcast and every other podcast that I make is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. They get episodes of this particular show early and ad-free, as well as totally unedited cuts if we have edits, and a bunch of other cool bonus content. So if you want to support this very independent show that runs entirely without sponsorships, make sure you check us out on Patreon. Also, sorry about the audio of this episode and last episode. I just had a recording issue. It'll be fixed next time, I promise. Speaking of which, the Apple Vision Pro is finally coming out. We haven't spoken about it since the episode.
Yeah, I saw some reviews started hitting.
Have they? I haven't seen those.
Yeah, it's the usual kind of very controlled kind of demonstration process, but I've not read any of them yet. I don't know if it's
Apple Vision Pro reviews. Because you were into it, right? When we spoke about it, you were into the idea of...
I love VR, yeah. And I've been a fanboy of VR for a while. I've made a few things with it. I've enjoyed it. I really like it. I'm not convinced it's going to catch on, but there's just so many nerds like me who enjoy it that I hope it does. I basically stopped making games for it because I realized in order to match the quality of what the VR specific devs were doing, I'd have to really commit to it. And I like my console and my PC games too much to kind of really dig in on VR.
You think that developing for VR is like an entirely separate skill set?
Designing for VR, definitely. Like, there's obviously a lot of technical similarities, but like the leaps and bounds of like making a VR game feel good are... It's you can do it. Like we've done a couple of VR games that I would say are good, but if I want to excel at it, I would have to commit to it, and I'm not.
It is an interesting one. I feel like, yeah, there are a lot of VR games that I feel like designing for a VR game would be really hard. That have VR mechanics that require, the player to move or whatever, that are not actually fun when sustained. So it's like they must have really interesting design meetings in terms of, are we doing this because it adds a layer of freedom, or are we doing this because it adds a layer of enjoyment? And they aren't necessarily the same thing. I think a lot of the time with VR, it's like, oh, well, that was fun the first time I did it, and I like that I can do that, and now I never want to do it again. Which I always think that, like, I had that with Red Dead Redemption 2. Do I want to see the animal be skinned every time, or was the one time good enough? Probably just the one time was fine. But then the detail is there, and then you're like, oh my god, the detail.
The dripping blood of the carcass. I think it's a I think it goes even beyond into kind of I can't remember what I was going to fucking say. I mean, it's quite late here, so my brain's just started to shut down.
Sorry about that.
I think it's an incredibly skilled profession. I've been lucky enough to be in rooms with very clever people on it in the past, and yeah, it's going to require a whole new... I mean, already there's a whole new language to interaction in that space. It also, though, requires a lot of players. Like if I'm making a game on like Xbox or PC, like I got WASD, I've got twin sticks, I've got face buttons, I've got that A is going to select things on the menu. Like there's a whole a whole set of grammar that gamers know. VR has developed some of that, but it's just very nascent. And again, like it would be exciting to be a part of that, but also I would have to really commit to it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if we'll do... We do a VR project. I become nerdy and do a VR project every like 3 years or so. So I'll probably come back to it at some point.
How different is the approach?
From a development point of view, it's very similar in that basically you put a camera in the world, and most of the VR comes with like solid APIs for doing kind of controller input. Like I say, the main difference is design is just thinking about, as you said, the physical experience of playing a game.
Yeah.
What's fun, what's good, all the stuff you're saying as well.
I play Beat Saber extremely regularly, and that's one mechanic, and that's all I need, and it never gets boring.
But I guess that's kind of my point is I look at Beat Saber and it's undeniably cool and awesome, but I don't, as a game designer, know what's making it great and awesome in the same way as like I can look at someone asked me earlier actually to look at a trailer for an indie platforming game, and they said, the jump looks bad to me, can you explain why the jump's bad? And then I bored that person for like 20 minutes with like, well, actually, I think what they're doing here is they're doing this on here, and the coyote time's a bit too blah, 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 blah. And there's all that lingo and experience and knowledge I've gained for a career. VR would be a reset, so that's what puts me on from it.
Yeah.
It's kind of... that's exciting in one sense, and it's very exciting for people doing it, but like it's in your 30s, you've got to start closing doors.
It's also a much smaller market.
That's part of it as well,
unfortunately.
for sure. Yeah.
I mean, I think still, I've not played everything. Obviously, there are a lot of VR games. My favorite VR game is a game called Chronos, made by Gunfire. It's in the same universe as the Remnant games. Chronos does. It's effectively like such a cheesy way. It was such a games journalist way of explaining this, but if Dark Souls had it's visceral Dark Souls. If Dark Souls had Resident Evil fixed camera, like RE1 type fixed camera.
Makes sense.
And
so you're looking at like a diorama almost as you're playing the game. You're kind of looking
sort of. It's Dark Souls Zelda is what the actual game is, but you have a fixed camera. And I think the reason I like the fixed camera so much, depending on whatever room you walk in, whatever, is that it really feels like it doesn't feel like you are the protagonist. It feels more like you are front row watching a huge fight. And so when you get the scale of like a giant enemy in front of you, it's really just
that's really cool.
Yeah, intimidating. But also the puzzle solving from that perspective is cool. And I'm sure I would have spoken about this before because I rave about it all the time and like brought it up at work. There is a mechanic that can only exist in VR where they effectively have weeping angels in that game. So, yeah, and I know that I didn't need to explain to you what that was. I make Weeping Angels references so often, and people are like, "What?"
Explain to the audience. There's going to be someone watching this that's not
yeah, Weeping Angels is a Doctor Who reference. The Weeping Angels are statues that will move when you aren't looking at them. So if you turn around, they'll be like right behind you or whatever.
I hosted a Doctor Who podcast before it went to Disney Plus, so like,
oh my,
it's very true.
A lot of Weeping Angels references. I love them, and I love them in video games too.
They're the best. They're the best.
Weeping Angels. It's super cool. But in Chronos, there are again. I'm basically giving any statue that moves when you aren't looking at it the term Weeping Angels. They're not actually called that in the game, but the Weeping Angels will move when you yourself are not looking at them, not when your protagonist is not near them. So like I, with my headset, would look at it and then
gotta like,
oh shit, we have to go this way. But I'm not looking where my character is because they're too far behind or whatever. So I'll be like, okay, I have to figure out where you need to go and then look back and see if like you end up dead. It's
like doing that quick so that
pretty much it's like constantly like, oh my god. Yeah, really, really cool in VR. But I think every game should have more Weeping Angel content.
Generation of was it Moss, the one with the mouse?
Yeah.
It was like a VR game with a mouse that I really enjoyed back in the day.
Yes.
Which was very simple, kind of little action platformer.
But... Chronos might have even come out before Moss. Let me check.
Way, did it?
Yeah. Chronos game VR. Chronos is such a like generic word.
It's like 70 games.
Yeah. Chronos came out. Yeah, it was Gunfire Games who made it. They got pretty solid reviews across the board. Trouble finding the release date. 2016.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, I love it. Moss game VR. Also
might be around the same time.
Generic
or
word.
later, they say.
I think a little bit later because Moss was PSVR, I think. 2018 was Moss. So yeah, Chronos is 2016 and still stands out to me as one of my absolute favorites. Apparently, I gave it an 8 out of 10 on IGN.
I may play that on Apple Vision. Who knows?
I love it.
We'll see.
Super fun. Yeah. But yeah, the Apple Vision, it looks like they, like you said, they are carefully orchestrating Vision Pro reviews with multiple meetings, whatever that means. I've never really heard of it.
It's like an old school kind of game demo where you go to the studio and sit in the room and play their demo and do all of that. Yeah.
YouTubers and members of the media selected for reviews will meet with with Apple on January 16 for a hands-on experience with a follow-up meeting to take place on January 23rd to go over the device's features a second time. So those sound more like a hands-on demo and less like a review. I don't feel like it really counts as a review unless you're taking it home, but I'm not Apple.
I think every choice that Apple makes is good and above reproach. That's my view.
Wow. That's very bold of you. Wow. Okay. Yeah.
I'm a controversial guy. Obviously, after my ranting last week, I'm staying calm this week.
No, it was good. Disagree with me, baby.
It was that.
No surprise that Apple plans to have firm hold on the review. If it were anyone else, I would assume that was a negative. But I don't feel that way about Apple. It's like it's got to be scary having a piece of tech like that is like nothing that
Oh.
most people will ever have even tried, and be like, go ahead, review it. And like,
It's very,
leaving people to their own
yeah,
devices.
it seems cool from the outside. I'm excited to try one. I 100% will pick one up and have a go at some point. I don't know if I'll buy one. I think they're pretty expensive at launch, so I'll probably
That's my issue. Too expensive.
find a friend and borrow it. Yeah.
Definitely.
How much was it at launch? Like 4 or 5 grand, something.
I think it's a few grand. Apple Vision
Yeah.
Pro pre-order for me to get one right now. Pre-orders haven't started yet, but soon.
Right. Okay.
Oh my god, the Apple website does just give me the information. This is just a lot of footage.
Want to scroll down over panning lifestyle shots?
It is actually very fancy. Nope, doesn't even have the price on there anyway, you sons of bitches.
Yeah. If you got to ask, you can't afford it, I guess is the logic.
Oh yeah, if they're trying to hide it, there's a reason for that. But apparently pre-orders begin January 19, which will be out of date by the time we publish this episode. So pre-orders were already up. Just give me the fucking price, somebody.
This is journalism. What we're doing right now is
type cost after you search. $3,500 US. Damn.
That is a big investment to make,
especially for something that we don't know how.
And for a first gen Apple product, which usually best to wait.
You love the company. What do you mean?
But I love the company. They're great.
The company, all company is great.
I like all companies. I'm a big company fan in general.
Yeah,
you know me.
Big company guy.
You know me. Yeah, capitalism. It's great. It's a good idea.
Again, as the only one of us that owns a company. I mean, technically I do, but still, you have employees.
I like all companies that are named after me. I think they're great.
Absolutely no bias involved. So there was this thing that I wanted to talk to you about that leans in a little bit to our conversation that we were just having about.
We're getting a segue.
Well, it's like I segued, but like I had to leap over something in order to make the segue work.
Okay.
Jumping.
Let's pull attention to it. We'll be fine.
Yeah, pretend that we didn't talk about Apple. Speaking of what components of VR make good game design in terms of like what's fun to the player or what's like you just did it because you should do it. I think that happens with a lot of video games. It's like you think you should do something, but it's not necessarily there for player enjoyment. I'm sure I said this on the show before, that a lot of games criticism, I didn't think about this until I started working in dev full time, was people will complain about things that they don't necessarily actually want. And this tweet from Patrick Mills, who welcome Austin.
Welcome Austin to the show.
I know from his work on Cyberpunk. He said, genre discussions are always pointless and irritating, except for the ones that say immersive sims are the best kind of game and all games can be rated in quality by what percentage of immersive sim they are. He said, which is a simply correct and uncontroversial opinion. And I was like, you know what? I actually do think when it comes to the critical reception of video games, most gamers heavily favor anything that has more immersive sim elements. That is what the YouTube audience considers to be a real video game is how much quantity of that game is immersive sim or not.
Is that immersive sim, or is that just like interactivity as a concept, like how much the player can express themselves?
The same for the purpose of the discussion.
For most players, right? Yeah.
Does that mean that you're defining that genre? Does that genre get to be the torchbearer for player agency? Is that essentially what that boils down to?
It sort of has to be. I think it sort of is.
Like simulation in general, I think, is largely thought of as the most interactive genre, right? In terms of self-expressive genre.
Yeah, but immersive sim is also like usually you do one quest and that locks you out of 10 others is like generally something that really appeals to people in terms of conversation, but I don't know how much it appeals to people in terms of playing it.
So of your experience, maybe even more so than interaction, how bespoke what your experience
is. Which is a very immersive sim thing to do.
Well, this is the whole thing that we're constantly told, and I've been in several like marketing people conversations where the same's been expressed of like that is the big generational shift that has occurred, is that our generations collectively value ownership, and the generation after us values unique experience, and in terms of both having an authentic unique experience themselves, but also being able to share that experience on social media and kind of.
Wait, can you elaborate on that? You're saying that our generation, as in like millennials.
I'm lumping you in with the millennials. You're like at the young end of millennial, or are you at the old end of?
I'm millennial by 3 years.
Okay, so yeah, millennials historically, we are. There's a school of thought which seems to be backed up by a lot of like financial data, which we are like the last materialistic generation in the sense that we like to collect and own stuff. And there's always outliers, of course. You're going to find a collector who's younger, and you're going to find a millennial who doesn't own anything, obviously. But the consensus seems to be that our generation collects and owns and hoards and fills our spaces with stuff. And the generation below us, and this is often blamed on social media, have grown up to prize unique experience or going places, or they spend more on restaurants and clubs and tourism than our generation did as a comparable price bracket. Yeah, or a comparable, income bracket. When we were earning X, the next generation earning X spends a larger percentage of that money on experiential. Then there's lots of reasons arguing for that. Another one is dating, and the way that dating has kind of turned into people are dating more than they did in our generation because of apps and stuff like that. So there's just a lot of interesting trends that have pulled in that direction. So a lot of companies, the sectors of their businesses, which are focused on entertainment and tourism, are doing better than their selling physical objects.
I wonder why.
It's usually blamed on social media that the generation beneath us is more performative than us in terms of what they're doing. Whereas we perform by having a bookshelf full of stuff when people come over. The next generation performs by putting up an image on Instagram of them in a cool venue.
Yeah, sure. I know that like fast fashion is a huge new generation thing.
You could argue that's a transition of clothing into an experiential product.
It is, because it's buying something for $6 to wear it once on your Instagram feed and then never wearing it again. So it is sort of the same thing. It is making clothing experiential, which is actually super interesting. Like it's
probably a big generalization. Like, to be clear, if you're watching this and you're a 15-year-old with 10,000 vinyl, then fair enough. But like, definitely that's a trend that people.
Not all gens.
Not 15-year-olds. I think
that person gets my approval.
Yeah, that's a cool.
That person, maybe gamers, maybe the generation of gamers is going in a similar direction. Maybe the gamer who wants to buy something, play it for 10 hours, and then put it on their shelf is being replaced by the player who wants to post a cool video of them doing something interesting on the internet, and more immersive simmy game would lean in that direction. I don't know.
I've related to this. I have wondered what the kind of thorough analysis would look like that reconciles all these independent threads, because the other thing that is an interesting, seemingly stark generational divide is I have never, despite having friends who do it, even present company included, I've never really understood the appeal of watching someone stream playing a game. It's not one of those where it baffles me to the point where I'm like, you're an idiot, you're wasting your time. It's more just, it's not fun other than certain kinds of games. And this is where I'm kind of going with it is that I would think that the more immersive sim type thing where you play it and you watch someone play it rather, and you realize, oh, they're doing things totally different than what I would do. I would be curious to see the difference in my playthrough. I know
when I was playing Baldur's Gate 3, a lot of people had like those kind of comments of enjoying watching other people play because it's the only way to get an idea of how big the game is.
Yeah. I remember playing through her story with my ex, and where I just said, I'll just I'm just gonna be I'm like your conduit. So I'll basically, obviously, the only thing you really do in that game is type words into the search.
Mm-hmm.
But I had played through the game and loved it, and then so I sat there going, okay, you just tell me what to type, and it was amazing how within one search it was a different game entirely already.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was just like the things that you intuit, and so that's, to me, that's a big sort of, if so much of your game consumption, as with Gen Z, is about watching someone play, it behooves the developer, I would think, to have something that can be wildly different from one playthrough to the next. Whereas like
because then it still has purchasing value. You've not just seen somebody play through the whole thing. Like, you're more likely to buy it.
I mean, we've even seen that with our visual novels, like, and that's obviously nowhere near the variety of something like a Baldur's Gate. I bet the same is true of your game, Austin. Musical, like seeing that one path through the game and then immediately going, here's 3 places I would have done something different. Or even if you just want to see the variety, I've spoken to players who've bought the game purely because they just wanted to see where they could kick the corners of the game, and where they could find stuff.
Yeah, I do get that. Actually, and that's one of those funny things where, as much as I am really not Gen Z in 99%.
You are, Austin. You are.
Oh, no, come on now. You could be a day over 30.
Oh God. As much as I'm like philosophically in a different place in so many ways, I do actually relate to that impulse as a gamer, where the sort of Spider-Mans and the Last of Us's, etc., of the world that when I was younger were overwhelmingly my interest. Like, I played strategy games and MMOs and things like that, which are a lot closer to the immersive sim side of things. But generally speaking, it was all about, I want to go through the motions of a great story. But I do find myself, like, when I got my Steam stat rundown, far and away, Baldur's Gate was my number one for last year. I mean, by like
a lot of people, right?
3-to-1 ratio compared to second place.
I played a lot of smaller indie games last year that I thought were really, really fun. But the game that I spent the most time in was Baldur's Gate 3. Starfield was second. And even then, I don't feel like I've even scratched the surface on Baldur's Gate 3. And I do think
Starfield was you leaving it going, flying for 10 hours towards the sun.
That's true, yeah.
Partly. I did play a fair bit of that game. But the Baldur's Gate 3, there's something so appealing about feeling like I haven't even touched it. Zelda feels similar, I guess. Look, that's
completely terrifies me. I'm going to play it because obviously it's such an important and cool game, but like that's really intimidating to me. I love a 5-hour game. I hear about.
I say that all the time on this show. I love it too.
I'm hyped. I was actually a little bit put off. I'm really excited. Big Prince of Persia fan, so I'm really excited for Prince of Persia. Yeah. So, I'll be honest. I saw a review of it that said it was 20 hours long, and I was like, I'm gonna, but still, like,
that's a shame.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I don't like that much value in the game. No, what are you doing?
It is funny how that is. I guess it's an interesting. But
that's generational as well. You've got less time as you age, right? I remember Deus Ex Human Revolution, playing that as a teenager for like 6-7 years.
Different story when I was in high school. I didn't have shit to do.
Yeah.
What do I care?
See, I was
these young people. I watched Benjamin Button the other day, which explores this as a thing.
Never seen it.
Benjamin Button.
No.
You'd never seen it?
Odd movie.
I love that movie. I recognize all of the things that people take issue with.
You liked it. Yeah.
Not least of which that it's so beat for beat comparable to Forrest Gump.
Well, same writer, so fair play.
So like there's a lot of A/Bs you can make that scan through the whole
part
film.
Where Benjamin goes running.
It's just that
Benjamin running is a theme in some places.
And
one's about feather and one's about hummingbird. It's not the same, Austin.
And the dipping in and out of kind of like historically significant times and places, and narrated by Southern drawl. There's
it's Brad Pitt in full interview with a vampire mode, which I like. That's my favorite kind of Brad Pitt.
There's just something that I found so wistful about that film that got under my skin. Admittedly, part of it was that I was so head over heels in love with Desplat's score to that movie that it was just like it basically made all the rest of it electrified, and I would touch it and it just instantly was in all my cells. But yeah, to me it's so unfincher. It's like it's
definitely watch it again though. It's darker than I assumed it would be, because I'd had the same conversation with people over the years, which I'd never watched it because I like the proper grown up mature. It's actually kind of a dark, cynic. It's got some of that Fincher cynicism that I love, like that kind of, or not cynicism. That's too strong a word.
Because I don't remember anything inherently cynical. If anything, it's like a fairy tale. There's a fairy tale.
Oh, it's about death. It's the threat of death and the knowledge of death and what it does to our planning and our lives. It's under the surface. There's that undercurrent. But
I never read it as.
Yeah.
I would argue it has exactly that quality, but in a beautiful, quiet acceptance kind of, like that shot.
Sure.
On the little bench looking out over the lake, to me is very emblematic, where it's just our time will come. I love that.
We're all going to die, but that's okay. That's about as that is Fincher at his most sweet and sugary, in fairness. We're all going to die, but that's okay. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, it's there's that great scene where they Kate Blanchett and Brad Pitt are finally both like around 40, and they've kind of intersected for the first and only time, and they know they're gonna, she'll get older. And they're that scene of them lying next to each other where, they say, I was just thinking about how some things, will kind of, what's the exact line? It's like some things,
nothing's forever or something.
Nothing.
Like that.
Yeah, exactly. Some things never stop changing, or something never lasts forever. What a shame that is. And just kind of looks at him and says, some things last forever. And it's just this poignant little moment. And there's that similarly where they're in her like dance ballet space, just looking at each other in the mirror going, let's try to remember this moment where we know forever this will be the only time that we ever kind of look comparable to one another. Something about just this, to me, this is the correct application of nostalgia. It's like this wistful longing of a thing that is incredibly fleeting. That movie captured that for some reason so immaculately to me. Again, I recognize the score did a lot of heavy lifting in creating it, because it's just a spot on.
It's that pain, isn't it, of nostalgia? Like isn't that the original definition of nostalgia? Is that it's actually it's a painful thing. Nostalgia is not a positive. I
always associate it with that. Yeah, it is the emotion associated with something that you loved and lost.
Yeah, it's the modern use of nostalgia as in like recapturing your youth. That's not where the word originates. It's the pang of pain you feel while remembering that you're no longer there.
I think
speaking of millennials spending a lot of money, I think a lot of that is nostalgia spending. I have spent a lot of money on Pokemon as an adult, like a lot, which apparently so is everyone else. I mean, it's the highest grossing franchise in existence, right? Pokemon makes more money than anything else. I've spent a lot.
I knew that.
Yeah, I know, it's nuts. Pokemon is number one in terms of.
I mean, there's so many ways in.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is people. Like, it's funny because Pokemon's motto from the start has got to catch them all, right? You tell me that when I'm 6 years old, and I'm like, I need all of this. And that's happening to me as a kid, and I did still want all of them. My mom was getting me like booster packs once a month on a Friday or whatever. And then you grow up and you still got to catch them all, but now you can afford to catch more of them. So it's just millennials just funding Pokemon to fulfill a childhood want that we got indoctrinated by on the every part.
That's got to factor in, right? That's got to factor into like people creating new franchises for like kids. There's got to be at this point like a 40-year plan, right, of how you're going to go back to that kid in the future and resell them this. I've heard it happens with
Disney.
Disney do nothing terrible at all. I've definitely heard it said that around like reboots, sequels, that there's a specific cadence that you go for, so you can get like specifically like with bringing back like old franchises, like something like Jumanji. There's a specific, I think is it 20 years, the nostalgia loop. There's like a specific timing that you're meant to hit with a franchise, because that's the point where there will be parents who want to take their children to it because they loved it.
Interesting.
You can get a multi-generational loop going. I can't remember. There's a specific thumb to it. Yeah, I've definitely heard that before. I can't remember what the numbers were, but yeah, I assume that's got to be a factor, like and how to hit people at different ages, how to get Alanah to still want to catch them all every couple of years. How are we going to hit you with messaging on that? How are we going to remind you constantly?
Pokemon's doing some really interesting stuff. Where yeah, I'm sure that I'm being marketed to because my god, it keeps working. But I am also been priced out of a couple of recent releases where I can't afford the Pokemon stuff that I want.
Is that like on the cards?
No, the recent cards are pretty affordable. I mean, that happens certainly with people reselling, but no, they had a Tiffany collaboration. So it was jewelry.
That's how you know you hit a certain age gap.
Yeah, exactly.
And they had
when your demographic has like financially reached a certain.
I couldn't afford it, and I was like, "This fucking sucks! Like, give me this bit with anyone cheaper than Tiffany." And then they recently just did
What on earth was the collaboration? What is a Tiffany meets Pokemon item? What does that even literally mean?
Honestly, they were
going to need an hour to come up with a pun response to that, Austin. I'm going to sit down and with some of my best writing friends, we're going to come up with 10 jokes.
I look forward.
I can't hit that quickly enough.
So it was a collaboration.
Something like Jimmy Choo and Pikachu is forming in my head. I'm not there yet.
You're getting there.
I'll get there. I'll work it out.
It was a collaboration with Daniel Arsham, who is an artist that I really like in general. Like, I highly recommend checking out his stuff. I have some of his Pokemon stuff that is also very expensive. But frankly, it's pretty ugly, which is the craziest part. So you've got these just sort of Pokemon that look like they've been eaten into, and they have diamonds. And so there's charms, there's a Pikachu necklace. There's a necklace with a bunch of... Yeah, that's sort of a bit of Daniel Arsham's style.
It's like a decay kind of going on. Yeah.
That I actually really like, but could not afford the Tiffany & Co. collaboration.
They look a bit like zombie Pikachu, though. There's definitely...
They do, yeah.
I didn't remember his name, but I've totally seen this.
I love his art, and I do have 3 of his statues that are not cheap, but I still couldn't afford the Tiffany. And then there was also...
Did the Tiffany come in that little Pokeball with the gold?
I know. And that's the problem. Is like, fuck, I want it because it's Pokemon. There's also a Pokemon family collaboration that just launched a couple of months ago. Again, devastatingly can't afford it. I have one friend who bought it, and I mean, she's rich, and I was like, fuck you. God damn it. Where basically Fendi bags with Dragonites on them. It's been really interesting to watch. Just came out on January 4th, apparently. I imagine... I don't even remember the prices. You know, I remember looking and being like, not for me, where Pokemon is now getting so many big brand collaborations that I can't afford it. And now it's like, what are these 50-year-olds? Like, who can afford any of this? Like, I don't know who these people, who are you making these for? Because you'll see a lot of people really slighted about the price in any of the comment sections because you're like, I've been here since the 90s and Tiffany, fuck you. And I'm like, I get it, man. I get it. They have to make the choices.
I was going to say the return on investment has got to...
Someone
has to work out.
I mean, absolutely. Yeah. It's the people exist.
And if you were in high school in the mid to late 90s, like when did the cartoon first come out?
I was a bit too old for Pokemon, so I think
late 90s.
PK, yeah,
because the movie was 2000s. I think you're the same. Are you born the same year as Rahul, Mike? Because Rahul always says the same thing. He was like, I was a little bit too old for Pokemon.
Don't we have like the same birthday or something? Or we're close.
He's November 13th, 1985.
Yeah, I was born. I came along 6 days earlier just to kind of get the groundwork ready before he showed up. Yeah,
just to
so we're a bit too old, me and Rahul.
Yeah,
us two were a bit too old for Pokemon because I remember my little sisters.
It would have been uncool, right?
Yeah, it was like we were grown ups. Basically, yeah, we would have been in that age bracket where you stop playing with the children's toys for 10 years before you get the pang of nostalgia and come back to. Yeah.
My sister was born in '89 and she wasn't too old. Like she liked Pokemon almost as much as I did.
89. So that would be, how old would that person be now? Like 34, 35. How's your sister?
My sister is 34. Yeah.
So that's your peak Pokemon. And so there's 34-year-olds who can afford Tiffany necklace.
That's true. Just ain't me. So the Pokemon games first came out in 1996. At least that's when Green came out. And I mean, I know 2000 because the 2000 movie That's the first movie I remember seeing in cinemas, whatever. But it is interesting, the whole generation of people who like Pokemon's had a huge impact on that now, like, now that I'm decorating a home, I have a ton of Pokemon art. I have kitchen towels. There's like stuff that.
And if needed a Pog, I'd be there. That would be my.
Oh my god!
Any minute now. Any minute now.
Austin's face, the joy on Austin's face when the word Pog was.
Well, it was like weirdly mixed, where I'm like, oh man, how did I get so into that? It's funny.
It was everything for a week.
Yeah. Had to have those crazy heavy ass metal slammers.
See, if I feel happy during this conversation, doesn't that prove the negative theory incorrect?
No, see, here's where South Park, I think, correctly modified the vocabulary. Nostalgia, I think, is supposed to be a kind of slightly pang in the chest, wistful memory, like visiting a cemetery and looking at a grandparent's headstone or something and remembering great times. Member berries is the cynical, I'm going to feed you that dopamine hit as low cost as possible by just recycling a thing you already know. And if it taps into that thing that you were in that magical kind of 12 to 18 range, it's going to hit you at your maximum point.
I like to fight that by playing great games like Tron Identity. That's what I do.
Shut up. I recently made a video that was directed at it's about stand-up comedians, but I did a bunch of digging.
The awful ones I've seen, or...
No, indifferent about the stand-up comedians. It's more about how we routinely they all advertise with the same politically incorrect, and we yell about everything they say on social media every time, and it just helps them really. That they're all being canceled effectively.
People go to a meeting room in Netflix and they're like, okay, what's the most controversial thing you're comfortable saying?
Definitely think so, and say it early so you get to make the joke of like making sure the pussies are gone, and it's really lame. But it was effectively about that. But I did some digging into like the notion that like humans have always been sensitive, has always been my thesis. We're just sensitive to different things at different periods of time. So like when everyone is like, you're too sensitive for jokes these days, I'm like, well, you people used to be jailed for stand-up. You used to be jailed for swearing in the street. You used to have rocks thrown at you for cheating. That's pretty fucking sensitive. And part of that was I found this series of articles about a bunch of different facets of nostalgia that were really interesting to read through multiple like spans of time. And the baseball one was the most interesting one I found. Sorry if I've spoken about this on the podcast before, because again, I found it really interesting. People will say, oh, baseball was so much better when I was a kid. And you can find that repeated over and over and over again every decade, since baseball began. Mm-hmm. And it, from what I could figure out from piecing these things together and from reading a thesis on it, you will say that based on what age you were when you developed critical thinking. So when you say this was better when I was a kid, the cutoff for that is, say you were 12 and that's when you started to realize that your dad wasn't perfect, or realize that your teacher wasn't the coolest guy you'd ever met, or realize whatever was wrong with other people. Everything before that, because you can't retroactively give yourself critical thinking, is perfect. And you don't have the ability to change how you feel about that, because you can't fucking go back in time and assess it critically. So there's no criticism.
Without copy protection up to the age of 12. And then. Yeah. So
whenever you think it was better in my day is exactly before you developed the ability to criticize things, which I just found to be so.
The thing of nostalgia for an age before you is fascinating as well. I remember when I was working on Volume, it's a Robin Hood game, so I did a lot of research into like the history of the Robin Hood mythology, a lot of which was written in the Victorian era, because the Victorians were fucking obsessed with medieval times, like, because back then that was the glorious era of the past, was medieval times, before we had all these newfangled industrial technologies. The idea of like romance, the romance era, Arthurian legend, Robin Hood, all of that stuff.
I suppose I feel like that about the 80s, and I wasn't alive for it.
Exactly. And you see this a lot with like, people are often nostalgic for areas they weren't in. What you're actually nostalgic for with the 80s was you probably like Back to the Future as a kid, right? Like there was content you consumed or media that you were aware of, and its depiction of the 80s.
It may even be that I watched those things before I developed critical thinking, and thus the 80s equals perfect. It could be that. I mean, I think I really liked the 90s too, but still, what was I, 7 when the 90s?
It's also what you hear parents and grandparents talking about as a kid. good and those things sound cool to you or whatever, that makes sense.
There's lots of evidence that shows also that when we mythologize this stuff, we're pretty much always wrong.
Yep.
That anybody that goes, oh, when I was a kid, everything was so much better for XYZ reasons. And you just ask someone who was 30 at the time, and they're like, well, you just had no awareness of all these things that completely undermine your contention. I've always found that very reassuring because it makes you realize things aren't orders of magnitude worse today. The people 50 years ago and 100 years ago and 150 years ago were more or less concluded things were on the precipice of apocalypse.
Always.
And that we have
That's
different
been humanity since we started writing stuff down. There's been apocalyptic predictions for the whole of human history.
There was
that's a known phenomenon that did I say this on the last episode of this show? There's like a psychological theory that's actually built into us to help us deal with the idea of our own death. I swear I said this on the podcast.
Bring that up.
Probably because I'm just speaking about denial of death. Like, I mean, it makes sense to me that if you want the whole world to end when you end.
It does. It's not comfortable to think that the world will just carry on without you. That's a horrible thought. Yeah.
I may have brought it up. I don't think I brought it up in that conversation, but I may have in the past that when I was in my degree, composition programs and taking one of the music history courses, I was reading this. There was a reproduced letter. There's this very famous composer from the kind of first half-ish of the 20th century named Charles Ives, who was kind of this closet genius. He was an insurance salesman who wrote all these insanely progressive avant-garde pieces of music that just people essentially found in a drawer after he was dead and were like, what the hell? The most imaginative and forward-thinking composer alive was just this anonymous insurance salesman. And so Charles Ives is a deeply fascinating composer for analysis. And I remember coming across this letter that he was like, kids these days don't have the attention span to appreciate proper music and what artists are trying to do. And the letter was dated like 1905 or something like that, where it was hilarious. I mean, it was just, you couldn't have possibly written a more translatable to today. Even just the phrasing of it was so. But
again, very human, right? There's records of it's Socrates or Aristotle or one of the great Greek philosophers who literally wrote a treatise about how awful kids today were and that they didn't take anything seriously. Like we're humans. We are basically the same as generations before us. We just have slightly better tools and education than the people before us, but the fundamentals of the human condition haven't shifted fundamentally.
I asked my dad what it was like growing up in the 80s, and he was like, we didn't really worry about anything. We just went places, we just did stuff. You weren't worried about the stuff you worried about today. And then I told him that
grew up in the 80s?
No, but he was alive. Like, what was it?
Okay,
it like to exist? Not grow up. Sorry, it's my fault using the wrong term.
So you calling her dad a liar?
I'm like, wow, he very young, he procreated young.
No, he was born in.
Life's different in Australia, Austin.
54, I think, maybe.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
Yeah, okay.
In any case,
my mother.
He was hanging out in the 80s, and
he existed.
Yes,
10 years old.
He existed. I think I asked 70s and 80s. Whatever. Who cares? Point is, I was like, crime rates.
Clearly,
where you grew up, Dad, have decreased since you were a kid. Like, that because I know exactly where you grew up, obviously. And he was like, I don't believe that. And so I pulled up the statistics, which is truly my most annoying quality. And the
data.
It's I really have to stop, but I can't help myself. I'll be like, well, I've got some data. Just let people be wrong. It's fine. But I can't do it. We'll get there. He didn't believe me, so I pulled up the data and I was like, it's just that you see it. You just have more access to information. That's all it is. Like, things haven't gone to shit. It's just that you see it more. But I also think, like, as you get older, saying things have gone to shit and I don't want to be part of that generation and everything is bad, again, just makes you feel better about dying. Why are we talking about dying so much on the show this year? What? Yeah, are we okay?
Why not?
Is it because we're getting close to 150?
It's because we know AI are taking our jobs. I think that's what it is.
Maybe, yeah.
And
we're getting close to 150 episodes, which is pretty old.
When you said the other day that we've been doing this for over 4 years, it actually broke my brain.
Isn't that crazy?
It actually broke my brain. I couldn't process that.
It feels like 2.
Yeah,
wild.
Considering that this year I'll turn 40, that means that this
Happy
podcast
birthday.
will have been 10% of my life.
That's a horrible thought. That's
Wow.
astonishing.
Look at us.
It is actually quite shocking because it still feels like such this new and
People don't see it, but we do actually record 7 days a week. We just trim it
Leave
down
it
to
running.
like the most interesting hour.
yeah, we just have an open feed.
We actually just live on this call.
The live stream. Yeah, this is the original Zoom. None of us has ever rebooted a computer or anything in the last 4 years. It's like the Zoom of Theseus.
Okay.
That's the most play, watch, listen joke that has ever happened.
I should
Like,
title the
Maybe
episode.
the,
Zoom of
that's gonna be
Theseus.
a
That's how you get
should be a
absolutely no
podcast show.
views.
That's gonna be a
We're not making
no,
this to be watched. by
No,
the
that's
way.
why it doesn't matter if I call it Zoom of Theseus. Sometimes I like
Yeah.
titling the episodes. I don't know. I don't know what to call this one.
I mean, we can talk briefly about something controversial and popular if you'd like. Just
We got a lot of views on recently. We recently got a bunch of views on the episode where we talked about everything that was wrong with Unity. So
Oh, that's drama.
that's. And then my
Well,
most recent
unfortunate that
favorite
there's no
thumbnail
drama
is the one
happening.
where Canvas is attacking Austin and Austin is laughing.
Yep. She's
Stuff.
she's delightful.
Yeah.
I don't know, Zeta males or something. No, Sigma males is the new one, isn't it? Let's talk about Sigma males for 5 minutes.
Yeah, we should probably talk about how like women need to how many men has woman had sex with and is allowed.
Body count.
Yeah. Is that allowed? No.
Is it? Should woman sex?
It's allowed.
Should woman sex? That's
Speaking
what
of
we're
which, have
gonna-
any of you seen Poor Things?
No.
Not yet.
Hated it.
What's that?
I know that I have a very unpopular take there. It's been lauded. Hated it. Hated it.
No idea what this is.
Did also recently watch One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Thought it was pretty good. And also saw Shawshank Redemption for the first time. Thought it was perfect. There's been 3
you watched Shawshank Redemption.
Loved
We
it.
tried to
Yeah,
goad you
okay.
into watching that on the show before Shawshank.
That was a
Redemption.
Mike Flanagan. He was outraged that I had not seen it and was like,
You
we have to
told
watch Shawshank Redemption.
Flanagan that you hadn't seen Shawshank Redemption. I wouldn't do that.
yeah, but it means that I get to watch it in his cool home theater. So I did.
That's a good experience. If you're going to watch Shawshank Redemption with anyone, watch it with Mike Flanagan.
Yeah, but when I told him
100%.
that I didn't love One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, he was concerned. But they're very different movies. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest,
Is there a summary of what you bounced off of about it?
I understand why it's a classic and it's very unique, and I think the performances are incredible. I bounced off of the and then. It's very much a and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens.
Right.
And not a lot of therefore. Like this person did this, which caused this. It does more of like and then, and then, and then, and then he shows up, and then he breaks out, and then this. So I just wasn't a fan of the way the story was told. But loved the performances. It also didn't leave me feeling too much. Like I was like, enjoyed it.
Right.
That's sad, but what? And I think that like that you could have made interesting commentary on like dictatorship probably with that movie, but they kind of opted not to. Anyway, I still liked it. I just didn't love it. Whereas Shawshank, again, I was like, this is a perfect film. What did better?
No, Shawshank Redemption is the perfect film, in fairness. Like, it is utterly perfect.
Brilliant. Loved it. Yeah. Top to bottom. Fantastic. It's so
I just looked up a plot synopsis for Poor Things, and now I have to watch it. That is a wild.
It again,
Have you seen Saltburn?
no, which
I've
also
not.
I want to see.
Is it just Talented Mr. Ripley? Because that's how whenever anyone
Yeah.
describes it, people.
I
It sounds. I've seen Talented Mr. Ripley. I like Talented Mr. Ripley. I don't
Same.
necessarily need to watch it again.
It's Talented Mr. Ripley, but with a much heavier lens towards like class difference.
Okay.
It's very much about analyzing this like hyper aristocratic family and the way they view the rest of the world. It puts so much through that lens, but it is a strongly Talented Mr. Ripley kind of because I remember I watched it.
It's a
with Angela,
Ripley-like. That's what we call it in
It's a
video
Ripley-like?
games. So it's an immersive Ripley-like.
which is somehow not an alien
RPG.
franchise thing.
Boulders likes, and people get so pissed off about it. Like you never fucking heard of a CRPG, but I think calling something a Boulders like is much funnier.
Oh, this funny.
I've got screenshots
funny.
of people being furious at me for it. Ripley's like is very good too, though. Like, just take the nearest thing and call it a something.
Yeah.
All other podcasts are a play, watch, listen like.
Any format of people talking.
Yeah, it's a play, watch, listen like, actually.
I don't think anyone else does this. I think we're the only podcast.
Stray Gods
people
like a
talking.
Stray Gods is a play, watch, listen like with music elements. And that's what the reviews were missing.
Probably should have covered it.
That's true.
In any case,
I like it.
I have to get back to work.
Same.
I don't know what I'm going to call this episode. What did you say? The ship of Theseus?
Zoom of Theseus.
Theseus.
Zoom of Theseus.
Just give me a second.
Good. We like it.
That's such a
Bracket Sigma males.
That's
Just
such
really
a
good
really,
reviews.
I just love the idea of someone watching, wondering when the payoff of that title is going to come along, and then
That's
finally hits.
a
It's
lot
so unsatisfying. So incredibly unsatisfying.
There's a lot of freedom in not caring if anybody watches this. It's working out really well for us.
Yeah. I occasionally look at the YouTube and see one's up and read a comment or two, but other than that, I'm completely unaware that anyone's watching this. That's probably.
We could stop uploading them and it would be fine. We just have a little chat once a week. That's kind of why we're still here, really. So it's great.
Nice.
I'm Alanah. I'm a video game writer. That's Mike Bethel. He is a video game director. That's Austin Winter. He's a video game composer. And we will see you next time.